in the language of the Wurundjeri people of the mighty Kulin Nation. One of the great things about being Australian is that moment at the beginning of all of our formal gatherings where we're invited to reconnect ourselves with the long story of our country and its First Peoples. And one of the great magical things about the Australian story is that our national identity, our shared national identity, starts with the story of the oldest living cultures anywhere on the planet, a story of resilience and survival, of knowledge making, of deep skilled stewardship of country and a deep knowledge across the vastness of time. And so when we open those gatherings with that acknowledgement of country, we're also being generously invited by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to think about that story as part of the long story of Australia, to connect ourselves with that incredibly inspiring set of traditions and knowledge making, and what a generous and open-hearted gift that is to every Australian today, whether ancestors have been here for tens of thousands of years or whether you're someone who has arrived in the last recent periods of Australia's migration story. It's an incredibly inspiring story, and it's something I always find deeply moving about our gatherings as Australians. I'm Misha Schubert, I'm the CEO of the Super Members Council, and it's my great privilege to get to MC today's event. And it's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to this official launch of our new research report prepared by Impact Economics and Policy, Economic Security and Retirement, How Life Events Affect Older Australian Women, does what it says on the tin. We are so honoured that the Minister for Women and Finance and for the Public Service, Katy Gallagher, has agreed to be here today, and the Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence, Kearney. Thank you both for making time in very busy diaries, alongside our stellar cast of key leadership figures and stakeholders across the community. To our member funds who contributed data to enable this powerful research, Australian Super, Rest and Aware Super, thank you. These powerful insights wouldn't have been possible without that work and the access to data to enable us to tell these stories, to identify them and to tell them with at great scale. And thank you to HESTA and your CEO, Debby Blakey, for hosting this event with and for us. I know women's economic security and retirement is a key priority for all of you in this room and for many hundreds and thousands of people who work across the architecture of Australia's profit-to-member super system. We commissioned this research to shine a light on the less visible drivers of the gender super gap. And we did so because we've come a long way. We've fought and celebrated many wins. That historic decision in the previous term of the Parliament, thank you to you both as ministers, to create the addition of paid super on paid parental leave for working parents across our country. Yes, let's celebrate that milestone. 180,000 working parents every single year, year on year on year, from here on in, will benefit from having that super paid on paid parental leave. When we've looked at the data about where that gender super gap starts to open up, unsurprisingly, it opens in people's late 20s and across the decade of people's 30s. What's happening in Australians' lives during that period of time? Well, commonly starting a family, and women still bearing a lot of that load of the caring responsibilities in the early years of children's lives. So paying super on government parental leave will be a transformative moment in that long march to true equality inside the super system and retirement, dignity and security for every Australian. And we also know that in recent years, the abolition of the $450 a month threshold has made a big difference as well. So up until about 6 years ago, people who earned less than $450 a month didn't have to have that super paid on their wages. And that change to the abolition of that rule will also mean that many, many low-income women particularly start to be paid super across our country. That will make a transformative difference at retirement as well. But we also know that more needs to be done if women are to enjoy the same levels of economic security and retirement as men. On gender equity and retirement, our job is not yet done. This research sets out a comprehensive picture of how common life events experienced by older women, particularly caregiving for elder relatives or for relatives who are in ill health, menopause, divorce, separation and family violence, can be really significant contributors to that gender pay gap. And that last decade of women's working lives can also be this sort of sliding doors moment where if one of these events or many of these events happen to you, it can really dramatically change that picture of economic security and retirement for women. And so it tells us that we need to do more about some of those drivers and structural levers, piece by piece in a methodical, systematic way. We know that with the right policy settings, we can put more women on track for economic security in retirement. And the good news in this story is that for older women, even having a bit of super can make a big difference in retirement. The report calls out that a woman who retires with just $35,000 in their vital savings balance at that point of retirement, and remember the median today is $154,000 for women, that $35,000 balance tipped into an account-based pension could generate an uplift of a woman's income of 15% rather than living just on the age pension alone. A single rate age pension is just over 30 grand a year. It's not a lot of money to live on week in, week out. And so we can see super, even for people who have relatively modest balances, making a big difference in the ability to pay the bills, to live in that mode where you are just not constantly stressed and worried about making ends meet. And we know that super is that powerful protective factor in poverty, against poverty in retirement. Really want to acknowledge today as well the work of women in super who've been long-time champions for women's economic security in retirement, as Chair Robbie Campo and CEO Jo Kowalczyk and the team from Women in Super. We love working side by side with you on these issues. When great women work together, feminist progress is forged. And we're honoured to be joined by Senator Katy Gallagher, wearing her hat as Minister for Women, Finance and the Public Service, to officially launch the report. Minister, thank you for your powerful leadership for Australian women and the major reforms you've driven across your long career in the public service in the Parliament, and particularly in the last few years, systematically, carefully, in a clear-eyed way, thinking about the big systemic levers and setting down the path of a program of work to really make big strides on those levers in a structural and clever way. We know you've been a long-time champion for gender equality and economic inclusion and the rights of women at all stages of their life. We're really grateful for that leadership, and we are really delighted that you've joined us today. Thank you so much. Would you please welcome Senator Katy Gallagher?
Thanks so much, Misha, for that very generous welcome. I do appreciate it, and I also would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm meeting on the land of the Wurundjeri people and acknowledge elders past and present. I come from the land of the Ngunnawal people, and the Albanese government has a deep and ongoing respect for acknowledgement of country and for the contribution that the traditional custodians make to the beautiful country that we all live in. To my friend and colleague Jed Kearney, it's always a pleasure to run into Jed in Melbourne or wherever we run into each other, and I'm so thrilled that we get the opportunity to work together in the area of the portfolio of women's policy and in Jed's other responsibilities in social services and the prevention of family violence. When Misha was very generously giving her introductory remarks about me, I work as part of a big team in the Labor government. The Labor caucus is 57% women, and no surprises that as we built our capacity within the caucus, that a lot of focus on shifting the dial on gender equality has happened at the same time. So I am one of many, and I work with Jed and with Tanya Plibersek and with Beck White in this policy space, and it's a highlight of my career, really, to work with such incredible women. And when I look around in this room and see all of those who've contributed to the discussions that we've had around gender equality, I see many of you sitting here with Debby, HESTA often leading the way, but Women in Super, absolutely. Some of the changes that we brought in the last term, I'd like to think that they were all because we thought about it, but it was because we'd worked together with advocates from across women's policy, across the super sector, to prioritise the changes that we've made around paying super on PPL, about the $450. And I know, and this report goes to some of the other things that you would like to see, some of the other advancements that will inform our thinking. To Brad Ruting, who we will hear from after me, I think, thank you for actually writing the report, and I know you had the help of researchers as well, and to Beverly and Jamila on the panel. I think actually that's what everyone's waiting for, so I'll keep my remarks pretty short, but it's great to, and I feel privileged to be asked to to launch this report, Economic Security in Retirement, How Life Events Affect Older Australian Women. And for many of us who have followed women and women in super and engaged on that policy subject, this report really confirms what a lot of us already knew. But I think its true worth is found in pulling all of that together in data and in evidence, and also the ability to make us look forward to what needs to happen, what happens next. The report details how life events, separation, illness, caregiving, violence can impact and potentially disrail financial security even after a lifetime of hard work. It's a story of women who retire earlier, earn less and carry the cost of care throughout their lives, often without recognition and too often without enough super. And we know also that the super system, as much as we love it and support it and will always defend it, wasn't built with women's working lives in mind. That wouldn't happen now. And again, that's a big change that we've brought in as a government. All of these big policy decisions that we take are informed and underpinned by gender analysis that helps us understand those structural barriers that might need to be addressed at the beginning, not partway through. But it was really, the super system was built around uninterrupted full-time work, which just isn't the reality for most women. So while we're proud of that system, we also acknowledge that it needs to evolve and in some areas reform. Now, driving women's economic security and gender equality more broadly has been at the forefront of the Albanese government's policy agenda since we were elected in 2022. And like a lot of other areas in women's policy, unfortunately, there isn't one quick switch or one easy or simple way to address the gender gap in retirement incomes. But we know that there are things that the government can be doing and should be doing that will help lift women's incomes across their working lives and in turn improve their superannuation entitlements. So backing pay rises in feminised industries is part of it. Dealing with gender segregation across the labour market is part of it. Expanding PPL leave and also paying super on that leave, as Misha mentioned, is part of it. Making childcare, early education and care cheaper and more accessible, part of it. Making sure we're doing what we can to encourage dads to take on some of the formal caring arrangements is part of it. Publishing gender pay gaps to shine a light on inequality so employers can act and employees can choose is part of it. And also, importantly, making sure workplaces are safe for women and that employers and not employees bear the responsibility to ensure that that's the case. And we know that safety at work is linked to decisions that women make around what jobs they want to do and where they go. And of course, the work that Jed spends a lot of her time on, dealing with the crisis of violence against women and children in this country that's forcing too many women to choose between their safety and their financial security, which is why a lot of the work, or we are doing a big piece of work right now at an audit across government at looking at the ways we can minimise harm through our own systems and provide better protection to women and children, whether that be through tax, through income support, or through child support. So that's an important piece of work that we're doing right now and will inform some of the decisions we take this term. So this report shows that issues around pay, safety, who cares for the kids, respect in the workplaces are deeply connected, and that if we're serious about closing that retirement income gap for women, we have to tackle all of them together at the same time. And while we have made some good runs on the board, I think, for addressing some of those structural issues that lead to the retirement gap for women, there is more that we can do. In particular, and I acknowledge Jed's advocacy in this area as well around older women and single women, advocacy for those demographic groups. The government is interested and will be, using reports like this and our existing relationships with stakeholders to help guide some of our policy thinking over the years, this term. So, in conclusion, thank you for the report. These reports are read across the public service. They do help help shape our thinking. So to the Super Members Council, for all of the funds involved in that, thank you very much. To Impact Economics, to Brad, for doing the work. I know that Dr. King and Dr. Rees were involved as researchers, to HESTA for hosting us today, and also for being a leading advocate for addressing the rights of women in the superannuation system. Thank you very much. It's been a privilege to launch this report, and I know Jed and I look forward to working with all of you in making sure that the gains we've made over the last 3 years continue in this term of government. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister. I'm going to get out the way and make room for Brad Ruting, who's been name-checked, to come and step us through some of the key findings out of this report. Brad's, of course, an economist with 15 years plus of public policy and regulatory experience. He's worked in the tax, super, infrastructure and social policy areas. He has crunched numbers on aspects of the data of the super system in many different forms and guises, and he's going to step us through that high-quality set of insights today. Over to you, Brad.
Get this to show up. Sorry. Hello, I'm Brad. Lovely to be here, and thank you, Misha, for the introduction, and thank you, Minister, for your words as well. And like you, I'm also very excited to hear the panel, so I'll try and be short. I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the traditional owners of the land here in Melbourne, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I'd also like to thank my colleagues at Impact Economics and Policy who contributed to this report, Nathan Blaine and Emily Mullane, as well as our contributors on modelling and other technical issues. So Dr. Leonora Rees, who I think is here somewhere, up the back, Christopher King, who was at the Centre of Policy Studies, and the amazing Bruce Bastian at the Super Members Council. So I'd like to start with some facts. At ages 60 to 64, the median super balance of men is $205,000. For women, it's $154,000. That's 25% less super. At ages 60 and above, 62% of men have super on average, compared to 52% of women. That's 10 percentage points less. Also ages 60 and above, 21% of men live below the poverty line, which is quite a lot, whereas 25% of women are in poverty. So that's 4 percentage points higher for women. And we know that the age pension does play a role in narrowing some of the gender gaps when people get into retirement, but the age pension alone is not enough to lift a lot of people out of poverty, particularly if you're a renter. And so analysis in the report finds that if you're a single renter, once you factor in the costs of housing and the level of Commonwealth rent assistance, you'll be about 23% below the poverty line. But in particular, and focusing on renters, the poverty rate is 60% for older female renters. A lot of them are single. Most of them have no super at all. So that means they're only a small, unexpected expense away from poverty or eviction, or really quite horrible outcomes. And I also note that when the latest HILDA data was released a couple of weeks ago, it revealed that the share of recent retirees who rent in the private market has doubled in the past 20 years. And finally, super contributions. So in 2022, the average woman had 18% less in super contributions than the average man. Now, this is despite women making slightly higher personal contributions and slightly more likely to make personal contributions than men. But when you look at the data, you can see a lot of that is women in higher income households. And once you take into account the much larger flows of employer super contributions, the compulsory contributions, there's a significant gender gap. And this gender gap in contributions coming into the system is what compounds at retirement and leads to the gender super gap and the gender retirement income gap. So the real focus of this report, as has been noted already, is how life events shape women's retirement outcomes. And so there's lots of things that can happen over a life course. There's quite an extensive list on the slide here. We really focused on those life events that tend to occur around middle age and in the lead up to retirement, so ages 45 to 65. And so while child rearing gets a lot of the policy attention, which is great, which it should, some of these other life events don't get as much attention as they should. And like child rearing, they also have very strong gender patterns. And I think, as everyone here knows, a lot of those gender patterns are running firmly against the economic security of women. All right, so now for a bit of a quick fire summary of what we found on some key life events affecting women at older ages. So firstly, caregiving. Women are 2.5 times as likely as men to face caregiving demands towards the end of their working lives, which is more than 1 in 10 women. And that's just for primary caregiving, not all caregiving. So the other thing as well, of course, is a lot of these women are still looking after their own children. The sandwich generation, which they're often called. And so this puts enormous pressure on women to reduce their work hours or to stop working completely. And the cameo modelling in the report shows that going from full-time work to part-time work when you're 60 means $28,600 less super by the time you reach pension age, or $1,000 a year less in retirement on average. So next, separation and divorce. 1 in 6 Australian women aged 50 or older are divorced. And more women are entering retirement on their own. Studies in the literature, which we reviewed quite extensively, consistently show that separation and divorce tend to have little or no effect on men's economic security, but a significant negative impact on women's economic security. And new modelling in our report shows that women who separate and divorce can actually end up with higher incomes after the divorce compared to women who stay married, because they're pushed into increasing their workforce participation to make ends meet. But once you take into account differences in household composition, like having kids to look after and not being able to share income and expenses with a partner, their spending power is actually 20% lower. And so in the cameo here, I'm the right one, yes. When the woman divorces at age 50 and enters part-time employment, she's got more money in her super account when she retires, but she has much less retirement income, so nearly $7,000 a year less, because she's no longer pooling assets and expenses with a partner. The next key event is early retirement. And we have what's called a gender lost participation gap, which arises because women retire from paid work sooner than men on average, so almost 2.5 years earlier. And some of this reflects the other life events that we've looked at. Retiring at 60 can mean over $70,000 less super by pension age and $2,600 a year less to spend in retirement. Health. So poor health is one cause of early retirement. It affects men and women in reasonably similar numbers overall, but the effects occur in different ways. So after the age of 50, the average woman is able to work for less than 2 years than men while in good health. And the challenge for a lot of women of managing menopause symptoms while working can be a reason for scaling back work hours or taking on less challenging and less rewarding, financially rewarding jobs, or simply retiring early. And the modelling shows that going from part-time work at age 50 due to health reasons could mean over $80,000 less super in retirement and $2,500 less in retirement income. And finally, family violence. The Australian Bureau of Statistics has data which shows 27% of women, so that's more than 1 in 4, have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner or family member since the age of 15. For men, it's only 12%. This has major impacts on workforce participation, and the report released a few months ago by Anne Summers put some numbers on this. This pivotal research really demonstrates some of the impacts on women being able to continue working at all and going from full-time work to part-time work. And so the impacts of family violence on economic security and retirement can be really big. In this cameo here, it means almost $100,000 less super and $1,400 less income each year during retirement if she stops working at 50. But these numbers assume that she stays partnered. If she's able to leave the abusive partner and not end up in poverty, then the financial hit could be even worse, and at older ages she may well end up in poverty. Okay, so recommendations, and it was really pleasing to hear the Minister already signpost a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about, and it's good to see that a lot of progress and thinking in government's already occurring on a lot of these issues. But also I think the progress that's been made in recent years around things like gender gaps in paid work and unpaid caregiving and super unpaid parental leave really shows that improved economic inclusion of women is possible. The thing is, we're just going to need to do a lot more of it if we want to ensure all women can have economic security in retirement, and all men as well, for that matter. So we put the recommendations in this report into 4 main buckets. The first one, remove barriers to female workforce participation. This is pretty big. So it's things like enhancing access to affordable childcare and aged care, improving rights to workplace flexibility, and reviewing the tax and transfer system through a gender lens to ensure it doesn't create further disincentives to women staying in work. Secondly, remove barriers to women accumulating super balances as large as men's. So this is mainly about eliminating that gender gap in super contributions going into the system, which I mentioned earlier. Wouldn't it be great if there was a clear commitment from government to do this? And a big part of eliminating this gap in contributions is eliminating the gender pay gap. But we also need to be doing some other things. So improving workforce participation matters a lot, but also things like refocusing some of the tax concessions in super away from policies which are mostly benefiting rich households and make them do more to help lower income households and people, and particularly women that stand to benefit if we were to do that. Part of this includes fixing the low income super tax offset, the LISTO, which you may have seen if you were at the launch, I think was it last week or the week before. SMC has done some new research and modelling on the LISTO, which shows it affects about 1 million people who are losing out because the thresholds have not kept up, and 60% of them are women. Thirdly, we need to better protect women at heightened risk of poverty and economic insecurity in retirement. So this means making sure our safety nets are fit for purpose and doing what they're meant to do. The big ticket items are really raising Commonwealth rent assistance and investing in more social housing, as I think we know. But I also want to call out the last one on the slide here at the bottom, strengthening safeguards against financial abuse. And so we know that the banking, insurance, telco and utility sectors have all done major reviews on how they can disrupt violence and abuse. And I think super should be next. And finally, the fourth bucket, make the system easier to navigate. Ideally, we'd do this by making the super and tax rules a lot simpler, which is quite hard. But in any case, there's a lot that can be done to ensure people can access independent information, and also to properly fund the financial counselling sector to make sure that people in vulnerable circumstances can get free and independent help. And so finally, to wrap up, thank you all for coming along today. It's fantastic to see so many people here for this launch. You should be able to, hopefully soon, find a copy of the report on Super Member Council's website. There's also a summary version if you're short for time. But now I really want to hear what the panel has to say.
Thank you so much, Brad, and thank you to the whole team that worked on this, including all of the people from Impact Economics and Policy and the Super Members Council team who've worked so hard on this project as well. I'm now going to invite our fabulous all-star panel to the stage, starting with the Hon. Jed Kearney, MP, the Assistant Minister for Social Services and Assistant Minister for the Prevention of Family Violence. Welcome, Jed. Yes. Beverly Baker, who is the President of the Older Women's Network. Welcome, Beverly. Thanks for being here. To Debby Blakey, the CEO of HESTA, thank you so much for being here, and yes, let's have you up here as well. And the wonderful Jamila Rizvi, Deputy Managing Director of Future Women. Yes, thank you. Excellent. We're going to try and unpack a few thoughts on some of these measures, drawing on the expertise of our eminent panel. I wonder, Beverly, to you first, if we can maybe start with inviting your reflections on what does economic security in retirement mean to the older women that you represent at the Older Women's Network, and how far are we from achieving it in your view?
I'll start with the end. Last question, miles away from achieving it. What we see in, what we want for economic security as we age is not to be constantly under stress of being forced to pay things that really we grew up believing would be provided. It's extremely difficult for women, especially my age. When I started work, superannuation was not something that we contributed to. When I was raising my children, the $400 a month limit was there, so that the older the cohort, the less they have in superannuation. And then with bad marriages, things that go wrong, we find all of the stats are here. And I've got to thank Brad for doing the stats, because it's our living experience, but now I don't have to fund a researcher because you've already done it for me, thank you. Because we operate in a shoestring and don't have the money to do that. But it's really looking, and we see it as a partnership with government. And that's not an insult to our political friends here, but governments have been walking away from their social responsibility around infrastructure and provision for a long time. And it's time now for us to say it's time to re-engage. The age pension is below poverty. That is unacceptable in a country this rich. That the issues around working paid parental leave are fabulous and a really great benefit for younger generations, but it's done nothing for us. We are still carers, and our caring allowance is a pittance with no superannuation attached to it. So there's a whole raft of things that we really need looking forward. We really need governments to step up and actually have a serious, confronting conversation, certainly around superannuation, given that super was meant to be a savings to offset some of the cost in your retirement, not an inheritance sink, which we now see hijacking the debate. So for security for women, partnership between government and a society in which they have contributed enormously to making wealthy.
I'm going to throw to Assistant Minister Kearney in a minute, but I just wondered also, Debby Blakey, whether we might actually let's go to Assistant Minister Kearney wearing kind of the dual hats. But I'm particularly respectful and conscious of your long-standing advocacy around women's safety and the prevention of family violence. When you've reflected on the kind of contents of these research insights, what really stands out for you, and what are some of the things that you think are the sort of next cabs off the rank in making further progress on these issues?
Well, congratulations first on the research. It really is fantastic. And as the Minister said, it does help policy making. There's absolutely no doubt about that. To have the independent reports and have the data there, as you say, we don't have to do it either. It's done. So thanks for that. Really important. From my perspective, you know, I come from the trade union movement, and I see many of my wonderful colleagues from the trade union movement here today. Of course, who have a great legacy in fighting for gender equity. And one of the first things that I did when I became president of the ACTU was start the campaign for paid family and domestic violence leave. And I have to say, the day that Tony Burke introduced that legislation into the chamber, I was there and I cried. It took it was such a seminal moment, I think, to hear a minister on his feet acknowledging that this is an issue. and that we are a government that's going to do something about it. And I am incredibly proud to be in a government that has a majority women now, and to have ministers like Katy, Gallagher there who I can't tell you how fiercely they fight to put women's issues on the agenda and keep them there. And it is, I think, much easier with a majority of women there, but you know, Katy's been incredible, and it's really wonderful to work with Katy as the Minister for Women. And in my previous portfolio in health, of course, I was very concerned about the disparity of women's health. And if it weren't for Katy, I don't think we would have got $1 billion package up for women. So I think we do have a government that is committed to this. We have a government that is committed to gender equity, and we have a government that I feel very proud to say I think we are doing a lot. Katy leaned over to me when we were looking at your things there, and she said, "Oh, we're doing a lot of that already. You know, it's pretty good," and that's true. And we are working on a lot of those things. And Katy did a great list of those things too. One of the things that stood out for me, having an interest in health, was the impact of women's health issues on retirement as they get older. And I think this is one of the issues where we perhaps need to focus a bit more is in that older years. But we are working hard right across the life course, and it's really important for us to take a life course approach. I think when it comes to this, if you get a good basis when you're younger, you're going to be set up better when you're older. So you can't just pick and choose one part of a woman's life. I think for me, housing. I mean, it just leaps out in every single economic report that you see. Housing is the critical issue. And we had 10 years of absolutely nothing happening in housing. And this government, I'm very proud to say, is going hell for leather on trying to make housing more affordable, more accessible. Next week, the 5% deposits for first homeowners kick in, 2% deposits for single women, single parents rather. These are things I think that really show this government is absolutely committed. That I think is got to be, I mean, all of it's important, all of it is, but I think if we can really tackle the housing issue, which this government is really trying to do, I think we'll be pretty much on the way there, Michelle.
Thank you for those reflections, and particularly for calling out the sort of urgency of the challenge around housing supply and affordability. It's probably a lovely build and segue then to Debby Blakey, noting that 80% of your members at HESTA are women, and particularly thinking about the sort of lower income profile of some of those members as well. When you look at these insights, Debby, and reflecting on the sort of lived experience of your members into and towards retirement, what are some of the things that really leap out at you as the next set of levers within the super system itself, and particularly some of those pieces that are illuminated, such as the LISTO?
Misha, thank you. And, is that on? You can hear me. Oh, wow, what a great report. And, you know, when I think of our members, as you say, almost 80% women, it feels as if it was written for them. It really does, yes. We're both members of HESTA. But it really does. I think it is the lived experience of our members. And incredible to see how much time and attention in the public discourse on superannuation is focused on the high account balance members. And of course, there's enormous privilege for them. But the attention we need for all Australians, and especially that lower income cohort, is enormous. And I think that's what you've started in terms of the older Australian experience. I mean, I loved the chart that showed the 3 different life stages. And unfortunately, to the minister's comments and also yours, Jed, we need to do it all. You know, we can't just do what's needed when women are young or when women are old. We actually need to do it all. But you have done such a great job of shining the light on that lived experience of older Australians. If I can just add, this is the space we gathered in today is called HESTA Heart, and actually such an incredible privilege for me as I sit here and I think of our 1 million, more than 1 million members, but that almost 80% of our women members, and I think of everyone in this room and how we've
gathered today with a focus on these issues, it's very, very special. I know it's very special for our members. Misha, to call out, I think it all needs fixing. If I have to call out one thing, I think let's start with the listo. It's powerful. It can change members' experience. It can change right across the age spectrum. And I think we need to do it.
Terrific. And just to really sort of support how deeply we've been thinking about the low income super tax offset, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? Everything in super has an acronym, possibly more than one acronym, sometimes it feels like. But for anyone who hasn't been following super bingo on the acronym card, the listo is a measure that was created as a fairness measure to basically make sure that very low income workers, 1.2 million of Australia's lowest income workers, got the original fair deal, which is that when you're putting aside savings for retirement, that you're meant to pay a lower rate of tax on your super because you're preserving it for retirement and allowing it to generate those big compound investment returns across a people's lifetimes. And so that's a really important fairness measure in the system. It's been frozen for 13 years, stuck frozen in a real dollar amount. And what that means for 1.2 million of the nation's lowest paid workers, 60% of whom are women, are that value of that measure has eroded over time for people who still get it. But it also means that with changes in wage rates and where the sort of tax thresholds are, there's a group of Australian low-income workers who earn between $37,000 and $45,000 who don't get any rebate with that basic fairness measure at the moment. And that's what urgently needs to get fixed. In a single swoop, that measure would help with the fixing the sort of fairness issue for low-income workers across the board, but also because it's majority women who are recipients, it would powerfully make another big stride forward on gender equity, which is why we think that's an urgent task to be undertaken. Jamila, Rizvi, Future Women runs Jobs Academy, which of course helps women who've been out of the paid workforce to get back into work, to build those skills, confidence and networks, and to tackle some of those structural issues. When you've thought about some of these issues illuminated in this report, how does that chime with your lived experience of the women that you see through that program and the experience of women trying to get back into paid work, possibly in later life?
Yeah, thank you. Actually watching some of the data come up on the screen from the report, I felt like I could put names to each of the, I could put name examples to each of the group from women who we've supported through the Jobs Academy program. I think the simplest way for me to describe what we're doing is we are recognising that you go into the workforce as a young person and you have a plan and then life happens. But the way life happens to women tends to mean they spend more time outside the paid workforce and it's harder to get back in once they're out. And the result of that we see afterwards in retirement, right? We see it in those poverty figures. And the reality is that those women who aren't in the paid workforce are not working. And I feel like that's a really fundamental point to make. It's not like, I'm sure there's a couple, but most of us aren't off having a holiday, right? They're just doing a type of work that our society has chosen not to pay. There's work we pay for and there's work we don't pay for. But I don't think any of us ever thought that the work that was not paid for should mean that you should be condemned to poverty after retirement, right? So it's about thinking about how do we create a system and how do we create structures that support women and support all people to be able to move in and out of the workforce around those critical caring responsibilities or around illness or around health issues so that they can do so in a smooth way that doesn't mean they're going to pay for it quite literally when they're older. And so what we're trying to do at Jobs Academy, I suppose, is get in the way of that. We can't stop life events happening, but we can support people so that we make sure that when they do happen, we can get them back to work faster than they would have otherwise. So we're spending a lot of time with women who are coming back after having children, coming back to work after having children. The stories we hear around the confidence gap, around the difficulty in finding flexible work, the challenge in finding work that can be done part-time is a really persistent story that keeps happening to us. As we move through the age spectrum, the number of women, particularly in their 50s and early 60s, who come to us and say, menopause was particularly difficult for me, fell out of the workforce for a period, I cannot get back. And if you've got a bit of a stereotype in your mind at the moment, that picture of who that woman is, you are almost certainly wrong. Some of these women are highly educated. They were on very high incomes. We've got former CEOs showing up in this program saying, I haven't got a job for 2 years now. I'm applying for everything. So I think there's also a question there around age discrimination, which is something none of us really like to talk about. We all love to tell stories about how much we love our grandmothers and how grateful we are. don't think we're showing our gratitude very well at the moment.
Really important set of issues, and thank you for, yes. We might just invite another quick reflection from each of you before we start to, towards the end of the time. So maybe, Beverly, back to you. That statistic and those sort of particular issues that are illuminated about what's happening for women with a housing sort of picture and for renting older women, what are the things that you feel most urgently need to be tackled there structurally?
I agree with Jed. Housing. It is absolutely vital. We have had somebody dreamt up the idea that housing was no longer part of our social infrastructure and it was a wealth generating sport. That was stupidity of the first order. I have 11 grandchildren and I know they are going to be struggling harder than we did to get a home. And we struggled to get a home. It wasn't easy. Nobody threw it on the table and said, here's a house. It is going to be much harder for them to get the house, so that their capacity to save, organise, have them. This is a lifetime thing, as you said. It's absolutely lifetime. And all the way along, with 11 grandkids, I'm looking back and saying, tell me about a gig economy. A gig economy doesn't pay superannuation. So they're working in their productive years, no superannuation building. I have friends in their middle life who are now subcontracting for a job, not for hours, but to do a job. No superannuation. So that they have got to take from their own income to build that super. So at our age, we're doing it tough. My worry is that for my grandchildren are going to be doing it equally tough, as equally tough, unless we seriously have a conversation, all of us being prepared to give up something, swap something, do something to ensure that then every one of us can age with dignity. And housing is, as Jed said, is absolutely essential. I mean, you can go without clothing, you can walk around naked if you've got your own house, but if you haven't, well, you might have a house, it'll be a big one and it'll be a lot of people in it, but it is absolutely essential for your well-being, your sanity, your capacity to belong, your building of friendships, all of the things that enable you to age well.
Jed, Kearney, maybe just another further reflection from you on building on your earlier response on housing, particularly family violence. When you think about the next logical pieces of work across the sort of architecture of this challenge, are there other things that particularly stand out for you, both in terms of the super system, but also more broadly, those other policy levers?
With respect to family and domestic violence, did you say?
And the sort of inequality picture.
Yeah. I think in family and domestic violence in particular, we have done a lot at the crisis end. I think helping women leave a lot. One of the main reasons women tell us they don't leave or they go back is because of financial and economic security. They can't afford it. So there has been a huge investment, I think around $4.5 billion really from this government in helping women flee family and domestic violence situations, establish themselves economically and securely. One of the main areas that we're looking at in this portfolio with Tanya Plibersek, who's my senior minister, is great. We're doing a lot haven't finished in crisis, and that's incredibly important. We're starting to really examine what we can do in prevention and early intervention, and I think that's going to be important. In the long run, we can't just always be the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. We have to build that fence at the top of the cliff. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of work going into that at the moment. If we could, we have a national strategy to stop family and domestic violence in a generation. That's a big goal, and we are working hard to do that. And so you'll see a few, I think, interesting policy announcements around that front end of that. So in family and domestic violence, certainly that's an issue. In the super world, I think, Katy touched on a lot of things. We do recognise that there is a gap. The gender gap is the lowest it's been ever in this country. And I think a lot of that is because of some of the things that Minister Gallagher mentioned in her speech. We have invested heavily in making sure that those predominantly female-dominated industries got pay rises, aged care, childcare, and that I can't tell you the feedback we've had from women working in those sectors, that the difference that's made, they're a lot of your members, the difference that's made to their lives, getting the pay increases. So I think that's a huge part of closing the gender pay gap, which of course will increase superannuation in the long run. The report raises a lot of other areas that I know that Katy said, we are working on a lot of those things, but there are areas, of course, I know you talk about the listo and other areas, I think, in the super world where we could certainly have conversations and talk about that. That's really up to the Senior Minister to do, but I know that she's very well aware of them, and I know Katy works incredibly closely with the industry all the time talking about those things. So I think by and large, closing the gender pay gap, looking at tax, looking at housing, looking at all of the factors that you're talking about. I mean, simply the things that I did around menopause. Oh my goodness, you mentioned that. We listed the first 3 menopause medications for, I don't know, 20 years or something, was it? For a long time. Put them on the PBS. Women saying to me, this has changed their lives. They feel they can stay at work. Now, one woman said to me, I'm just smothering myself in the gel chair. It's fantastic. That has had a huge impact. Making sure the health system is fit for women so that they can age more healthy and that they don't have to fall out of the workforce 2 or 3 years before men do. Looking at caring responsibilities, we've tripled the, for everyone on social benefits, the rental assistance. We've done more for rental assistance than any other government, really, for people who rely on social security payments. I think, I guess, I don't want to repeat the wonderful list that Katy just said, but, I think for a government, we are absolutely committed to this, and we are, putting our cards on the table and doing a lot. There's a lot more we can do. I'm not saying there's not, but I think you really have a government that is incredibly interested in this and willing to have those conversations, Misha. So keep having those chats with the Finance Minister over there is what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you for that thoughtful set of observations and calls to action. We are running really tight for time, but maybe just a really quick kind of final thought from both you, Debby and Jamila. Debby, just first to you, what are the things that you think super funds themselves can be doing as well on all of these levers to really push that dial of progress forward for women's equality?
I think firstly, it's really important we don't ever turn this into something that women should be fixing for themselves. There are systemic issues. I mean, the Minister called those out magnificently in terms of how super is designed. So the most important thing we do is advocating and working to change that. But I do just want to pick up on the housing item. I think that's been put on the table. We all know it's a critical issue. I think it's important to be very clear because this gets confusing. It's a housing supply issue. You referenced that, Misha. And super funds are doing. We've been investing in affordable housing for 8 years. We're learning how to scale that. I want to say it hasn't been easy. I think there's still some work to be done in policy settings, but we do have a role in how we can increase the supply of affordable housing, absolutely. And a bit like Jed saying, with the government doing stuff, we are certainly doing a lot in that space.
Elegantly expressed points and very neatly to time as well. Thank you. Jamila, you get the fabulous last word. So I wonder if we could invite your thoughts on how do you think we need to amplify the voices of women and women's equality advocates in economic policy conversations to really be driving forward and achieving this progress together?
Big question for not a lot of time. I know there were some media colleagues who were coming along today for the information rather than to report. I will say I think a big challenge is having this conversation in the media. I think the mainstream media necessarily tend to be focused on the urgent over the important, right? That's part of what news is. It's about what's happening today in this second that wasn't necessarily happening yesterday. But that often means that the most important issues don't get a lot of coverage. And I do think there is still some good old-fashioned bias that means things that affect, when people are thinking about older women, doesn't get coverage and it doesn't get the attention, which I find really distressing. I think the opportunities come in new forms of media and come in telling this story in new forums. So I think for those of you who are policy experts, who are working in this space, working for super organisations, I mean, with greatest respect to my colleagues at the Financial Review, there are other places people get their news. Most people reading the Financial Review is my dad, and he's probably not your target audience. So think broadly, think in I think a more inclusive way about the kinds of ways you can get your message out there. And I think about message channels that aren't traditional news. We know that anyone under 40 now is mostly getting their news off social media or through podcasting. And so we need to be thinking creatively about how we have these conversations, because one of the things I worry about is I apparently, you know how you go through your life, you go through the seasons. I remember the 21st birthday parties, then everyone got married, and everyone's getting divorced amongst my friends. Well, that's the fun season we appear to have hit. And one of the things I've noticed is the number of my women friends who, the idea of having a conversation about their potential right to their male partner's super, would never touch it, so terrified of that conversation. We have to normalise a bit of a conversation about the fact that these things are not necessarily equal. And I think those kinds of cultural shifts are things we can't wait for government to do. That's not something government's in charge of. That's something the rest of us have got to be contributing to.
Yeah. Thank you for that spirited way to kind of close out the panel. And confirming I read both the Australian Financial Review and receive much of my news these days from TikTok and Insta videos, and everything in between, which is terrific. A huge thank you again to everyone who's joined us for this important event today. A thank you to our expert panel and the ministers. Thank you to our partners at Women in Super, and thank you to everyone who is going to carry the torch of progress forward. I feel energised and excited. We've got a to-do list. Let's get on it. Thank you all.